The desert burned that evening, not with fire, but with silence so fierce it felt alive. The wind had stopped, and even the crows had abandoned the dying light. Only the smell of dust and the faint echo of a sob carried through the heat. A cowboy rode slow through that emptiness, his shadow stretching long behind him like an old sin. He wasn't searching for anything. Men like him rarely did, but sometimes the world puts something broken in your path just to see if your heart still beats. He heard them before he saw them. Two voices, trembling and uneven, carried through the dry air. At first, he thought it was the wind mimicking sorrow. But then came the words, clear and small, like the sound of a prayer. "Sir, it's our mama's last day alive. She said you might help." He stopped his horse, so suddenly the dust rose around him like smoke. His gloved hands tightened on the reins. The voices belonged to two little native girls, their hair tangled, cheeks streaked with dirt and tears. They stood barefoot in the road, holding hands as if the world might swallow them if they let go. Behind them, the horizon was a sheet of copper light bleeding into shadow. He dismounted without a word. The creak of leather was the only sound. He had been called many things in his life, ranch hand, soldier, wanderer, but never savior. He looked down at them, unsure of what kindness was left in him to give. "Where is she?" His voice cracked, low and unused. One of the girls pointed toward a ridge where the land broke open like a wound. He followed her gesture. A crooked tree leaned against the sky, the only living thing for miles. The girls started walking. He followed. They moved through silence thick enough to drown in. The desert underfoot was cracked and flaking, whispering dry complaints with every step. He noticed how the smaller girl clutched a small woven charm. Blue beads and feathers faded from the sun. It looked fragile, yet carried like something sacred. By the time they reached the tree, the light had begun to fall apart. Beneath its twisted branches lay a woman, still young, but her skin had the dull sheen of someone who'd been fighting too long against pain. Her dress, once vibrant blue, was now torn and dulled by sand. Yet she looked peaceful, as though she had already made peace with leaving. The cowboy knelt beside her. She opened her eyes, slow and uncertain, trying to place the shape above her. For a heartbeat, he saw recognition flicker there. Not for him, but for someone else. She smiled faintly, mistaking him for a memory. When she spoke, her voice was barely a breath. "You came back." He shook his head, but gently. "No, ma'am. I'm just passing through." Her eyes filled with tears she couldn't afford to shed. "Then God sent you instead." The girls knelt beside her, one resting her head on the woman's shoulder, the other holding tightly to her hand. The cowboy reached into his canteen and offered water. She took it only after urging her daughters to drink first. He watched the way her fingers brushed their hair, each motion tender, deliberate, as if memorizing them for the afterlife. For a while, no one spoke. The desert around them seemed to hold its breath. He could feel the woman's frailty like a tremor in the air. Her pulse was a faint rhythm beneath skin too thin to hide it. He didn't know her story, but he could read the history of suffering in her stillness. He'd seen that look before, men dying in battle, women waiting for letters that never came. Then she whispered something that made him freeze. "You look like him." He glanced up sharply. "Like who?" "My husband," she murmured. "He was white like you. Said he'd come back when the soldiers left." Her eyes drifted toward the darkening sky. He never did. The cowboy swallowed, his throat dry as the land around them. "What was his name?" "Eli." The name fell like a stone between them. His hand trembled. That name had lived in his memory too long, carved deep into the cracks of regret. Eli was his brother, the one who'd vanished after the war, leaving debts unpaid and hearts undone. He stared at the woman, at the two small faces that mirrored her, and something cold inside him began to thaw. He said nothing, couldn't. The truth felt too heavy to place upon a dying heart. The girls had fallen asleep beside their mother, the smaller one's hand still gripping the woven charm. The fire of the setting sun slipped behind the hills, leaving only blue dusk and a whisper of wind. The cowboy gathered dry brush and lit a small flame. Its light flickered across their faces, soft, tired, innocent. He watched the woman's breathing falter, slower each time, until only the faint rise of her chest remained. She turned her head toward him once more, eyes glassy but gentle. "Promise me," she whispered, "don't let them grow up alone." He wanted to answer, but the words caught somewhere between guilt and grace. He only nodded, the motion small but true. She closed her eyes, holding her daughters tighter. Night fell completely then. The sky filled with stars too bright to belong to this world. The cowboy sat motionless beside the dying fire, listening to the small, fragile sound of her breath fade into silence. He didn't realize he was crying until a tear struck the dust at his boots. Far away, a wolf howled, a lonely sound that seemed to echo his own. And when the fire burned down to embers, the woman's hand slipped from her daughter's, her final exhale soft as a prayer. The cowboy rose, shadows draped around him. He looked at the children sleeping beside what they didn't yet know was loss. The wind began to stir again, carrying the faint scent of rain. He whispered into the night, not to her, but to the ghost of his brother. "You should have come back, Eli." The desert gave no answer. Only the horizon flickered, one last flash of lightning, far away, like a warning that morning would come too soon. The storm broke before dawn, not with thunder, but with a stillness so strange it felt like the desert itself had stopped breathing. The cowboy woke to find the fire dead and the air thick with the smell of wet sand. The two little girls lay curled beside their mother's body, still warm enough to fool hope. For one fragile moment, he let them believe she was only sleeping. Then the truth settled in, the kind that doesn't arrive with noise, only silence. He rose slowly, his knees stiff, his chest heavy with the weight of promises made to the dying. He didn't know what to do with two small lives that weren't his, only that leaving them would turn him into the same ghost his brother had become. The older girl stirred first, blinking up at him. Her lips trembled, but she didn't cry. Children raised by hardship often don't. She only said, "She's gone, isn't she?" He nodded once. The smaller one woke next and began to wail, the sound sharp enough to split the morning open. He carried the mother's body beneath the crooked tree where the earth was softest, and began to dig with his hands. The girls gathered wildflowers, if such things could still be found here, placing them near the shallow grave. The sky grew brighter as if watching. When it was done, he took off his hat, bowed his head, and whispered something halfway between a prayer and an apology. The girls stood on either side, their small faces set with a grief too large for their years. When he turned to leave, the older one tugged at his sleeve. "Where will we go?" she asked. The question hung there, raw and unanswerable. He thought of the towns he'd drifted through, the saloons and the silence afterward, all the faces that never looked up when he passed. Nowhere had ever felt like home. "We'll find a place," he said finally, his voice rough as gravel. "Somewhere kind." He didn't know if such a place existed, but lies can sometimes keep a heart alive long enough to find truth. They began walking. The horizon shimmered with heat, though the morning was still cool. He carried the younger girl on his hip when her legs gave out, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat inside. The older one walked beside them, clutching the woven charm her mother had once held. It swung gently with each step, blue beads catching the light like forgotten prayers. As they traveled, the cowboy's thoughts drifted to Eli, his brother, his shadow. He remembered the night Eli left, eyes wild, hands shaking. He had spoken of a woman and a promise, of love caught between war and shame. Now the pieces fit together too neatly, and the realization burned. He had found not just his brother's sin, but its consequence. Every step forward felt like walking through confession. By midday, they reached a dried-up creek. The cowboy stopped, dropping his pack. The girls drank the last of the water, and he let them rest beneath a sliver of shade. He took out the small charm and turned it in his palm. It wasn't just a trinket, it was her blessing, her faith placed in him, a stranger made guardian by circumstance and blood. The wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of horses far off. He tensed, instinct sharpening. Men rode these trails looking for bounty, not grace. He motioned for the girls to stay quiet. From the ridge came 3 riders, dusty, armed, their faces hidden beneath hats pulled low. When they spotted the trio, one laughed, a sound that made the air colder. "Look what the desert left us," he said, drawing closer. The cowboy stepped forward, hand resting on his revolver, though he had no will for violence. The men saw the grave behind him, the fresh earth still dark. "You bury her?" the leader asked. "That woman was worth money to some folks." His words cut through the wind like glass. The cowboy said nothing. The older girl pressed her face into his coat. "Best keep moving," the leader sneered. "You and those half-breeds don't belong here." Then they rode off, leaving behind laughter that stung worse than gunfire. The cowboy waited until the sound faded, then turned back to the girls. "We'll keep heading north," he said softly. "There's a trading post near the river. We can find help there." As the sun sank low, painting the land in firelight, the younger girl asked if her mama could see them from the sky. He looked up, saw clouds shaped like mountains and birds tracing invisible roads. "She can," he said, "and she's proud you're brave." They camped by a cluster of stones that night. The cowboy couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the woman's face, the soft forgiveness in her final gaze. It was a mercy he hadn't earned. He pulled the charm from his pocket and tied it to his wrist, the beads clicking softly in the dark. The older girl stirred beside him. "You knew him, didn't you?" she asked, her voice small. "The man Mama loved." He froze. The night seemed to lean in, waiting. "Yes," he whispered finally. "He was my brother." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Then maybe God sent you so he could say sorry." Her words sank deep, steady as the stars above them. The cowboy looked out at the endless dark and felt something unfamiliar rise in his chest. Not peace exactly, but the start of it. He lay back, eyes on the sky, listening to the girls breathe beside him. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled again, gentle and low, like a promise being kept.